Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the afternoon session of this fantastic symposium. My name is Dr. Parth Patel, and I work as a senior lecturer in management at AIB, and I'm going to be co-chairing alongside Mahan some of the afternoon session we have. So our first presenter is Jessica Heron, and I'll briefly introduce her. So I'm just reading it from the bio that is there on the brochure. So Jessica holds a Juris Doctor from Monash University and is currently a practicing solicitor at Morris Blackburn Lawyers, specializing in employment and industrial relations law. Jessica is part of a team in Brisbane that is listed as a top-tier law firm for plaintiffs, an achievement that her team are proud of as passionate advocates for workers' rights. In September 2022, Jessica established a working group with some of her union clients to uncover ways in which reproductive health issues could be better dealt with by workplaces. The workplace group has grown significantly and now includes some of the largest unions in the country, covering every industry. The working group's advocacy efforts have been reported on by every major publication in Australia, which was one of their goals in helping to facilitate a national conversation on this topic. And Jessica currently provides advice to unions on how they can establish better workplace policies that address reproductive concerns such as menstruation and menopause. So Jessica will be presenting on the topic of reproductive leave and flexible work entitlements. So Jessica, over to you.
So I appreciate we've kind of gone over a bit of some of the stuff I'm going to talk to you about today. So I'm just going to brush through those things so we're not too repetitive. But one of the key reasons that our working group has been advocating for reproductive leave is the suffering that that having a reproductive body can involve. And so the two most common and talked about types are menopause and menstruation. And of course, there's lots of things in between those two that have already been touched on today. But most of you would have experienced this, but if you haven't, if you just try and think what it would be like to be sitting in an important meeting and having a hot flush and brain fog at the same time, and then thinking, well, I'm just going to have to keep working because I'm too embarrassed to talk about it. And this job is too important to me because I've got a family to feed and I need to eat myself. So these are the kind of stresses that we see women mainly dealing with on a regular basis. And one of the things we talked about was what do workplace laws do for that right now? Is there anything that's helping women in this particular way? Which we found out was not, which I'll get to. So what we did about it, just so a bit about myself, I'm a lawyer at Morris Blackburn. Morris Blackburn is a union firm, so my clients are unions. And I work with incredible people who are big advocates in this space. And our working group really was established out of organic conversations about what more we can do to support people in this way. And so we started with blue collar unions. We thought that was the most important voice that needed to be heard first, because a lot of our union clients were saying that women didn't even have access to toilets or sanitary bins, let alone the idea of reproductive leave. So we really wanted to shine a light on those industries that are far more male dominated to see where the quick wins were. In our first meeting, which was in August last year, we sat down and we said, we need to go around and we need to talk about what do your members want? What do these workers need? And no one could answer. All of these are really incredible high-level union women and no one knew the answer. And it's because we don't talk about it. And no one in their unions had been talking about it to enough of an extent for them to have an idea of what people needed and what could be changed. So that's where we came up with the idea of surveys. We thought, well, before we start looking at how we can change the law, we really need to know what it is that people want and what it is that we can provide to them to help them. And so we started surveying the workforce and we got to about 2,000 workers. And so I'll share some of those stats with you today. But it's important to note that the ACTU have now taken over the working group, they've created their own working group, which is excellent because that means that we're going to have coverage across the country, across every industry and almost every union. So that's a really awesome step forward for this. And it also means the national campaign is coming, which is incredibly exciting. But from our surveys, the key messaging that came out was, as we anticipated, there is a serious stigma that exists, okay? And so the suffering exists, and what sits very closely alongside that is shame, the sense of shame, which is then keeping workers silent. So these are the survey results. Now, these are just from the blue-collar union. So just for your understanding, that's rail, tram and bus, transport workers, manufacturing, and a few others that I can't recall right now. So 75% of workers said that they suffered from painful periods if they were going through menstruation. And the most galling stat, I think, is the next one, that 74% of them don't feel like they can talk to their line manager about being in pain at work. This is the breakdown as to why they don't feel like they can speak to their manager. So I don't think they would understand being 34%. That's a pretty telling statistic to us because it shows that there's a really big gap in education. So it's not even necessarily that the person thinks, oh, they'll negatively impact on my career, as the other 33% think. It's that they genuinely don't think there's enough education around for people to understand that a painful period can be debilitating. I don't think I would be believed as concerning to us. That's something as well we think is the really negative effect of the stigma. It's, as Mary was saying earlier today, it's that, women are just seen as being a bit dramatic and maybe a bit hysterical at that time of their month, and so it's not important. The next one, we wanted to see whether or not they actually would use leave. Is it something that they want? Because it is, it is a contentious topic, and if women say, well, actually leave isn't something that we think we want and or that we need, then that's fine. We hear that and we won't campaign for it. But as you can see, 78% said they did. So to us, that indicates that there is a real need for people to be able to actually take time out of their job as opposed to just having the rest. The next one is whether or not it impacts your struggle to focus. And so we think that the statistic here, so I'll read it out just for people who aren't seeing the slides. If you experience painful periods, are your periods so painful that you struggle to focus or your ability to perform your work is otherwise impacted in some way? So for 73% to say yes, that indicates to us that this can be categorised as a work health and safety issue. There's serious implications for people not being able to focus at work in blue-collar jobs. And now I appreciate that's a contentious thing to say where you want women in those jobs and you're saying, well, they're possibly a work health and safety issue. So it's a very fine line that we need to walk here. And I think it can be agitated on, and we can advocate for this whilst still getting women into the workforce. And the way that we do it is we look at all of the excellent reforms that we have had under the Fair Work Act for women already, and they're things like parental leave, etc.
Sorry, what was the stat again?
So 73% say that they struggle to focus because of the pain. So the menopause survey results, they were actually far more slim. And so that indicated to us that there are not a lot of women at menopause age working in blue-collar jobs. That's, it's an issue for us because it's not inclusive, and it should be. And it also means it's really difficult for us to get a snapshot of what it's like for working women in those industries, because a lot of them didn't really participate in the survey because they were feeling frightened to, because they felt that it would get found out and that they would perhaps lose their job, which was a concern. So unfortunately, the statistics on menopause are low. So I really hope that when the ACTU survey results come out, we get a much clearer picture on menopause, because it is a big problem. But as you can see here, so how frequent are your symptoms? 36% say daily and 36% say multiple times a week. So really bad at maths, but that's more than 50% at least having symptoms weekly. And does it impact your ability to perform work? 66% say yes. So also a work health and safety problem. Very similar to menstruation, menopause, the people going through menopause have said that 76% of them have said that they can't talk to their line manager about taking leave or requesting flexible work due to their symptoms. So again, the stigma is very strong. It's not just for menstruation, it's for menopause, it's for every issue that comes up in regards to a reproductive body. So how does the Fair Work Act help now? It doesn't at all. It is completely silent on these issues. You can't even read them into things, which we as lawyers do every day. It's our job. I find this galling, and I got really into looking in the history of it and thought, how has this Fair Work Act come about? What is it a product of? And my research showed me it's a product of legislation that came out in 1902, which was adapted in the 80s, and then again under Howard, and then again under Rudd. And now we have what is the Fair Work Act. And to me, that's indicative of it's for a masculinized workforce. It was created from a masculinized workforce, and it has maintained its ability to protect a masculinized workforce. That is no longer the case. It's not even close to the case. It's over 50% of female labour force participation right now. So like Mary said, I think we should get a bit bolshy and actually make that known more. We're a powerful force in the workforce. We help the economy significantly by having that many extra people working. So to ask for a few little things in the Fair Work Act to make it a bit more accommodating for someone with a different body, I don't think is that much of an ask. I think it's a pretty easy ask when you break it down. One of the interesting things with the wins that we've had, so parental leave is a good one because that actually came out in the 70s, and that was a union won in a very hard fought battle. And everyone said similar things to what they're saying about reproductive leave now. You're going to make women unhireable. Why would you hire a woman if she's going to get pregnant and leave for a few months? Now, fast forward 50 years, parental leave entitlements have only increased. They're not good enough. I completely agree. But they have only increased. And then we look at the statistic of female labour participation, and that too has only increased to the point where it's superseded men. So I don't really see this as something that's going to prevent women from being hired. I wanted to just quickly walk you through why I think the Fair Work Act is so poor on this topic. So currently, if you have dysmenorrhea, which is painful periods with no formal diagnosis, you're going to need to utilise your personal or carer's leave under the Fair Work Act. Now, the definition of that is it needs to be the employee is not fit for work because of a personal illness or a personal injury. Now, dysmenorrhea is not a personal illness and it's not a personal injury, nor should it be categorised as that at any point. And that could be negative for the stigma that we're trying to remove here. And there's a very good argument to say, if I went to my boss tomorrow and I said, hey, extremely heavy bleed today, sorry, chance that I might pass out in my office, it's what happens, I might faint. Can I take a sick day? And then if he understood that it wasn't a sickness and an injury, which he might, I got to give him some credit. So long story short, there's a good reason that he could turn around and say, actually, that's not a personal illness. So in short, you can't take a sick day for that. There's a legal argument to say that's not a valid reason to take a sick day, and therefore it leaves people open to losing their job because they've taken a leave day inappropriately or being forced to take their annual leave. Now, flexible work entitlements at the moment, you need to have a disability. So that's if you've got endometriosis or some form of diagnosis in relation to any of your reproductive issues that you're suffering from, then you're fine. You can make an application through your employer for a flexible work arrangement, and I would encourage you to do that. And then now there's also appeal rights under the Fair Work Act. So if your employer rejects that and you want to appeal it, you can go to the Fair Work Commission and have that heard. So that's what I do. If anyone needs help with that, let me know. But where I see this as an issue is that just generally menopause and menstruation are not disabilities, and nor should they be categorized as disabilities. So anyone that's suffering from all of those symptoms that we had up before, so heavy bleeding, brain fog, pelvic pain, none of that will assist you in making a flexible work arrangement, but yet your suffering is still the same as someone who may have a diagnosis. And a further issue is that it's taking people with endometriosis, 7 to 10 years, I believe, to get a diagnosis. So you just have to suffer for 7 to 10 years before you can make a flexible work arrangement, even though that your pain has remained the same the entire time. It just seems completely unfair. So as I said, you're not sick when you've got your period, nor should you be. And these are the reasons why we think the Fair Work Act really needs some reform, and we need some words changed in there. Now, we've assessed the domestic and family violence leave model as a possible policy proposal. Now, this isn't the formal position of any union. It's just something that us as lawyers have looked at to think, how can this possibly, what can it look like, and how can we get it there? Because the goal is to get it as a national employment standard. So this is the leave days. Now, family and domestic violence leave is 10 days. So it's 10 days of paid leave, and it's not pro rata. So I think that's really important, because when you start your job, you shouldn't have to work for 4 months to get a day off so you can manage your pain at home. So that the leave, we say, should be given to you upon employment. And then you can take it in a lump. You can take, the full, we want 13 days. You can take 13 days, or you can take 1 day at a time and filter it. It's completely up to you. So the fact that it's been done with domestic and family violence leave indicates to us that it can be done for this reason as well. And similar to domestic and family violence leave, we don't see that this needs to be a gendered policy. We want it to be inclusive for all genders. And so that means if men are suffering through andropause, they're going through IVF, anything, it's completely available to you. It's an inclusive policy, and there's no need for it not to be. So that's all I've got for you today. But are there any questions?
I had a
Yes.
small question. Like, your data showed that.
Louder, please, because online is
Oh yeah, I have a question. The data shows that
Yep.
76% of women, they are not feeling comfortable to share it with the manager, and with the menopause case, that is also the similar finding, 76%. Now, it's a bit strange. I'm curious about two things. Then 24% are not. That means, does it depend on the manager's gender? Number one. Number two, a female employee experiencing menopause must be already quite senior in the work, because it should be about 45 plus, right? My understanding. So if still they are not empowered to share it with the manager, it's a bit concerning, that I found.
Yeah, I agree. So I guess you're saying, as in, people going through menopause are typically a lot older, and therefore it's unusual that they also don't feel comfortable talking to their manager because of their seniority. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make, because it shows that the stigma doesn't discriminate against age. Doesn't discriminate against age or gender. The stigma is cultural, and until you can remove the shame away from your reproductive symptoms, I don't think it matters how old you are as to whether or not you're going to feel comfortable talking about it to someone in a position of power over you, like a manager.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jessica, I had a very small question. Was there any further variance in your data in terms of the preference among women employees in terms of, well, the necessity for a flexible working leave around menstruation, for example, was more preferred or more higher than for menopause, or vice versa? Was there any more variance in there, or they both have the same level of importance among the participants?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was typically the same, and the main change that we saw with preferring flexible work over leave was more industry based. So it was in the blue collar unions, they need the leave because if a particular participant had endometriosis and she was using opioids for pain, and so you can't drive a train on opioids. So no matter how much flexible work they were going to give her, she needed to be at home on certain days to rest and take that medication. It's very different for people, say, in the financial sector who work in banks and superannuation funds, where flexible work we saw through COVID is completely manageable. And they might be more inclined to make a request for a flexible work arrangement and never use a leave day and never need one. That's why we really think it's this ask shouldn't just be about leave, it needs to be about flexible work too, because we think the uptake on the flexible work might actually be higher.
Great. Maybe we can take one more question if anyone has.
I have one again with what Mamoon has said. So there are 24% who actually feel comfortable to talk to their manager about these issues. So when you check the data, are they 24% there will be women managers because they feel comfortable? Yes,
that was the most common response.
Then the actual comparison, if we see that, will be much more lower. Because being a woman manager, we can talk more. You can make much more better connection when we are talking about these issues as compared to male managers.
Definitely. And I'd be really interested to see some statistics from perhaps the nurses union or the teachers union to see if they get the same kind of response, because my general feeling of it will be that it may not be, within nursing, it may not be that you're afraid to share the symptoms, but you might just know you're going to get a flat no, so that's why you don't share. It's not because you're frightened of your manager, because you're kind of desensitized to bodily things in that industry. But it's a good question, and I think I'm looking forward to seeing more survey data come out on this so we can kind of get to the bottom of those questions.
Cheers, thank you.
No worries.
Anyone else? Any more questions? Yep.
I work in organisational development, and just this week we've been having conversations around people's willingness to disclose things like whether they're Aboriginal, whether they have a disability, because we're all about data and evidence and all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting here thinking about the disclosure aspect of reproductive leave or flexible work arrangements. I don't know. I'm just wondering, is there a way to do it where disclosure's not required?
Yeah, I understand that as well. So it's, not everyone wants to say that they're going through menopause and that they're having a hard time, and this is why. And I think that's an individual's prerogative. I don't think this is something that, if you want to share it on a team chat and say, I'm not coming in today because I've got a heavy flow, fine. But if you don't, that's also fine. And no one should pressure you into doing that, because at the end of the day, it's your personal job. And, you don't tell everybody in the office why you've taken a sick day, you just give your manager a sick certificate. So I think there should be, if the policy comes through, I think you should be able to just let your manager know. And hopefully if you're comfortable in sharing that with the manager, because they do need reasonable evidence under the Fair Work Act in some manner. I hope that answers your question, but it's a...
Yeah. What are the many thoughts racing through?
No, it's a very interesting contention with this, because on one hand you really want to break down the stigma and scream it from the rooftops that it's normal, but you can't ask that of people who are private. Not everyone's going to want to do that, and you have to respect that.
It's a bit off topic, but in terms of the legislative framework for IVF treatment and fertility treatments, how does that work?
So that would be part of it.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. So it's still part of the 13 days that we suggest should be taken up.
Yeah.
So any kind of IVF appointment that's needed, it can be used. And that's where we it's our biggest sell to men on this because we do
Yeah.
have to sell it to them too. I hope we've done a decent job.
Yeah.
But it's things like that because IVF can be quite onerous on
Well, they need to support
the
the
male partner
partner.
too. Yeah, exactly. Lots of appointments and
Yeah.
disruptive to the workday. So
Yeah.
I think there's benefit for both here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jessica.